ChewintheCud, Season 1, Episode 11. I'm your host, Andrew Jones.
And I'm Neil Greggor, and we're back to have another chat.
Yeah, that we are. Our guest today is Sarah Bolt from Kingshay. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
It's only a microphone, don't be afraid of it, don't be afraid. So, anyway, our guest today is Sarah from Kingshay, and she is Technical Knowledge Exchange Manager. And for anybody that knows me, I struggle with one of the following words. We are here to talk about Sarah volunteered and then questioned why did she volunteer, and I asked, followed up and asked her to come and do this. We're going to talk about carbon sequestration. I think I've said it right.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah, if I'm reading it, I can do it. But if you're trying to tell me without reading, I've started now trying to visualise the word in my head before I say it. It's awful, because I've got to try and get it right for today.
All three of us pronounce it differently.
Well, exactly. So I'm sure we'll stumble somewhere along the lines, and you'll enjoy listening to us stumbling along the lines. So yes, Sarah's here to talk about carbon sequestration. And but other than that, Neil, how are you since we last spoke to you?
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah.
Good.
Haven't seen each other for 15, 20 minutes.
Yes, since our last recording, we're doing 3 back-to-back today, so that's good.
We're working hard.
So as we record this, it's now early March, but obviously by the time you listen to this, it should be, well, mid-silage season really, because it will be mid-May this will be going out. But anyway, our guest is Sarah. So hello, Sarah. And well, like usual, where do you start from, and how did you get to where you are? Because you and I first met when you were still at AHDB, and we've been in contact ever since.
So I've been at Kingshay for coming up for 6 years now. Doesn't time fly when you're having fun? And my role is Technical Knowledge Exchange Manager, where I'm really responsible for all of the technical output of Kingshay.
Right.
So
Yep.
you're probably aware that Kingshay is probably very well known for its technical reports and sort of dairy insight particularly.
Yep.
So I'm responsible for getting that out to our farmer members. I write a lot of it myself, but also have a team of other people to help me, whether they're employed by us at Kingshay or some freelance journalists as well.
Wow.
But so what's your background before Kingshay? Obviously, I mentioned AHDB, but
Yes, so I've had a many and varied career, all within the dairy industry. But perhaps I'll take you back to how it all started. At age 4, I turned around to my parents and said, "When I grow up, I want to be a dairy farmer." This might sound quite normal to a lot of people that are listening to this. However, my father was a merchant banker in the city and my mother a teacher, and we lived somewhere within the M25.
so it's a little bit different background than most of our speakers and listeners.
Yes. So, and I keep
But
saying...
what at the age of 4 made you want to be a dairy farmer?
So we went on holiday and stayed on a very small... it wasn't even a dairy farm really, I guess it was a small holding where she reared calves and had a herd of pedigree jerseys, of which they were more sort of rearing the jerseys, and she hand milked a couple of house cows, and I learnt at age 4 to hand milk these cows, and that was it.
Fantastic.
Bitten, and sort of everything I've done since has always been to...
with the aim of being in the industry.
Yeah, definitely, so absolutely love it.
And so from the age 4, how did your career develop?
So I had to choose my right GCSEs so that I could then go on to do the right A-levels to then get to university. And I think sort of my careers teachers didn't really know what they were trying to tell me about.
Middle of London, they're going to not have any idea on dairy farming, are they?
You want to do what?
So very much left to my own devices to work out what I wanted to do. I ended up going to the University of London, but actually it was Y College, which was out in the middle of rural Kent, so could have the best of both worlds really.
Yeah.
Before I went, if you didn't come from a farming background, you actually had to take a year out to go and work on a farm in those days before doing the university course, which I think was, it was brilliant. So I actually signed up on an apprenticeship and spent 1 day a week going to Dutchy College, where I learnt to weld and plumbing.
All bits.
All those practical jobs that I never really thought about and certainly didn't think that I'd be doing. So I do have some quite good practical skills, and again learnt. So I worked on 2 farms over that year, and
And obviously loved it since. And then, so finished uni, was it straight to AHDB or?
No. I spent time with Mole Valley Farmers in their shop in Holsworthy to start with. So obviously a good place to meet lots of farmers. worked my way up into the sort of farm sales team, so
Yeah.
out and about selling feed, seed, fertiliser.
Yeah.
Where did I go from that? Oh, I went straight to trading from there.
Yeah.
Didn't really enjoy that too much. It wasn't really my kind of thing. So moved on to Fulwood,
Oh yes.
where I managed a
Oh,
team
wow.
of 7
Yeah.
engineers. So
Yeah.
so it was sort of really concentrating into the dairy
Yes.
the dairy
Yeah.
industry by then. So spent a while with them before going to Miltlink.
Yes.
And from Miltlink, after 3 years with Miltlink, then went with AHDB.
DB.
So
And you obviously one of the knowledge exchange managers with them.
that's right.
Yeah. Because I say I can't remember what it was, but obviously that's where we first met, and then obviously went on to Kingshay, and obviously I saw you at the dairy show last year, and you went, yeah, I'll do that, and then when I rang you, was it about a month ago? You went, did I really do that?
Sounded enthusiastic as ever, and now the reality sets in.
But then before, you said you went to Exeter University then? didn't you?
I did. I was very lucky that whilst I was with AHDB that they asked me if I'd do an MSc in animal behaviour at Exeter University. So
Yep.
I did that part-time over 2 years.
And what was that?
So my research was actually looking at how we keep our dairy calves. So
Yep.
looking at individual versus pair rearing and the age that we put those calves together as to,
Yeah.
to what impact it
And
has.
obviously, by what you said, that yours is some of the work that's quoted on the what's the word I'm looking for?
Oh, the Tesco contract.
Yes.
They certainly sort of. I think I'm one of those that takes the blame for some of that research. Yes.
But no, it's important stuff though, isn't
Yeah,
it? It
yeah.
is. It's all about doing a better job of what we're doing. So it's
Absolutely.
important, and obviously Neil and I weren't aware of this till 5 minutes ago, and I think maybe if you would, maybe another time we ought to have you back to talk about that. Let's wait and see how we go. But
That would
I
be
think
fantastic.
I think that would be something really
It would
interesting.
be. Yeah.
But here today we're here to talk about carbon sequestration. It's the whole carbon. What's the word? Carbon is in the news. Where we should go. Everybody thinks the answer's plant trees, but it's not. So it's really not either of our subjects. So we're here as much to learn today as everybody else. So start us back from the beginning. I mean, I'm sure we've got tidbits to add along the way, but go for it.
We hear so much.
Yes,
Super.
yes. What is right and what is wrong? And
Well, let me start by saying I am no soil carbon expert. And in fact, let me tell the story of how I got into it. So back in 2019, I thought carbon's the thing that everybody's talking about. I need to make sure that I'm telling my farmers about it,
The right
and they're
thing,
the
yeah.
right thing,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
they can do to impact their carbon. So I set about writing one of my technical publications to tell them what they needed to be doing.
Yeah.
To find that actually I couldn't find that information myself. So, in true Kingshay style, really, we decided to actually do a bit of research ourselves. We're known very much for
for
sort
your
of
research.
for our research as well as our practical farming advice. So we put together a research project to look at 100 grassland fields across the country.
Okay. Just grassland.
Just grassland,
Yep.
because I guess we're mainly dairy
Yes.
focused.
But I just wonder if you might have had a wooded area as some kind of control or something like that.
No,
Right.
literally just looking at grassland areas.
Yep.
And alongside getting that soil sample, we asked those 100 farmers to fill out a very comprehensive.
Sorry, was this just mainly because Kingshay has traditionally been southwest based, just in southwest or across the whole country?
Across the whole country, so
Okay, yeah.
anything from Scotland down
Yeah.
through, obviously predominantly down the west coast,
Yes.
where
With the
dairy
dairy
mainly
is.
is.
Yeah.
But across a range of different soil types, everything
Yes,
else.
yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
we wanted to find out as much about all of these soils that we were getting as possible, and really find out how those soils have been treated over the last however many years. When were they reseeded, were they permanent pasture,
Yeah.
and all of those things. So we got that information, sent the samples off to the lab for testing. We decided that we were going to actually test for soil carbon
Right.
rather than testing for organic matter and making assumption as to what the soil carbon is.
Yeah.
Yes. So actually test for what we're looking
To test
for.
for what we want. And I think that's sort of, at the time I thought I didn't realise the importance of that, but actually as I did some more research, I then found that actually we all take this a figure of 58%, that soil carbon is usually 58% of soil organic matter.
Yeah.
Right.
But actually it's that was a figure that was generated back in the 1900s by a bit of research, and actually it can really range. So my view is, if we want to measure something, let's actually measure what we want to know rather than...
Funnily enough, the podcast we recorded before yourself, we were talking about if you can't quantify it, you don't have a baseline, you can't know where you are, you don't know how to treat it. You need to be able to quantify what you're doing. And in that instance I quoted, wasn't it, we were talking about sampling slurry. And, you know, the NRM results range from, as I said at the time, I can't remember the unit, but something like from like 2 up to 32 with an average of about 6 or something like that. I can go and find it if anyone ever wanted it. I've got a copy of it, but it just shows what the range can be.
And you need that baseline.
So you need to have a baseline of what you're doing yourself before you can do anything else.
Definitely. So we also tested for soil texture as well.
Okay.
And it was something that I'd picked up along the way, that soil organic matter is very much held in the soil by the clay particles.
When you say you tested soil texture, because obviously there are soil maps, aren't there, of what everything should be, were your soil textures what you expected them to be based on that? I'm guessing by the look on your face, no.
Really interesting, because one would think that you would know the texture of your soil because it's something that you're working with, that farmers are working with on a daily basis. They know its workability, they know how it tends to hold water.
This one needs working a bit more, or vice versa. Yeah, exactly.
What's really interesting is that we didn't give them a flow chart to work out what it was, but we just asked them and gave them all the different options. And it was really interesting that only a quarter of farmers matched their soil texture with the lab analysis.
But then what you're saying is probably true though, if you think about it. Farmers looking at it practically, how do I get the best from this soil? They're looking at it scientifically, going, oh well, it's a sandy clay loam or whatever it is. It's just, this is what my soil is, this is what I need to do, and these are the lessons I or my father or whatever have learnt, and that's how we work that field. So they're looking at it from a practical point of view rather than a science point of view, aren't they?
Certainly. So, as I say, we did measure that soil organic carbon via the do-mass method rather than loss of ignition. It ranged anything from 1.2% right up to whopping 10.5%.
So 1.2 to 10.
1.2 to 10.
But then what did you say the average was expected to be? 58?
No, sorry.
Oh, I'm getting my things confused.
No, so that's as a percentage of, so the soil organic carbon as a percentage of the whole soil. So I was saying as a percentage of the soil organic matter. Sorry.
Right. Okay, so 1.2 to 10, that's a big range.
It's a huge range.
It's a huge range.
A huge range. The average was 4.2, which is, pretty much where we expected.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we did look at our results and compare them to the National Soil Inventory, as they'd done I'd found some work that they had done. Yeah. And, sort of really interestingly...
I'm assuming peaty soils were higher up, were they, on the carbon than...
Definitely. I mean,
sandy was the other end.
Exactly. Is the main overall sort of overall assumption. What I then found was that actually some work had been done by Rothamsted Research looking at clay content versus soil organic carbon content.
Okay, yeah.
And actually making that a ratio, and then telling us actually whether it was a very good ratio, as I said earlier, that it's the electrostatic bonds within that clay that hold that soil organic matter and therefore soil carbon in the soil.
Yeah.
So they worked out that actually, as a ratio, you can rate it as very good, moderate, or degraded, and that's really good. So you can actually compare a sandy soil to a clay soil, because actually, if we're just saying, oh, this soil was 4.2, and it's a really clayey soil, actually that's not very good. But if it was a sandy soil, that's going to be absolutely excellent. So this really brings it, and to me, this seemed a really practical...
Added another dynamic to it,
It seemed a really practical way of measuring it, because you can't change your soil texture.
No.
You're dealing with what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
So actually, it was a really good way of actually saying to farmers, how well am I doing for what I've got?
Yes.
And I think
yes.
this is something that's often forgotten from a
Yeah.
practical point of view. We talk about soil organic matter or soil carbon, and this is a really good level.
But if your soil ain't going to do it, it ain't going to do it.
if it's not going to hold it
Yeah.
in the sandy soil, it's not going to hold it.
No.
So
Yeah.
I think that this is a really nice way to look at it, and think that
Definitely.
we should always look at it as a percentage of
relative to
the clay in our soil.
relative to the soil you've got.
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
What was really interesting is that 59% of our soils that were permanent pasture were landed in the good and very good categories, and actually sort of the ones that weren't so good were definitely shorter term lays,
Yeah.
and even sort of when they've just been recently reseeded, etc. So
Yeah.
Because they've been turned over, released that
Yeah.
carbon, I guess.
definitely.
Yeah.
So I mean, as I say, I think
Did you look then at some direct drilled stuff to see if that was better in terms of a new lay?
yes. So I did have a look at how the lays had been
Yes.
established.
Yes.
And it was really interesting as to, I'm flicking through my book because I'm not very good with figures.
That's all right.
There's me going through my book here.
Just a sort of like an observational question. If you, in other words, a grass pasture on a heavier soil, it's going to be far better than anything else.
Yes.
That's where you're going to get your best capture.
Yeah. A long-term established,
Yes.
something that hasn't been ploughed up for 50 years,
Yeah.
that's had time for just
Yeah.
all
And
of
it's a heavier
those biological
soil.
cycles
Yeah.
to be working as they should be, and that heavier soil to be able to hold on to it.
Yeah.
Is
With
certainly-
minimal tool, with, like you say, drilling.
Exactly.
And, yeah.
So there was quite a big difference between soils that had been ploughed, or those that had been one pass cultivated, or
Yes.
even those that had been oversowed.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find some figures here. So that those that had been ploughed were, as their latest reseed, were down under 4%.
Yeah.
Those that had just been one pass cultivations were just on 4%, but those that had been direct drilled or oversowed were sort of an average of 4.5%. So you can
So it
really
makes a
see the
difference,
difference.
doesn't it?
Huge difference.
Yeah.
So as soon as we're disturbing those soils, we're really affecting all of that soil biology and all of that soil carbon that's tied up in that
Yeah.
soil and,
Yeah.
and releasing it. So this is where,
So from a carbon point of view, then
yes,
you're better off oversowing or direct drilling in an existing lay than you are reseeding and whatever else.
I mean, that then probably poses questions as to how do you practically do that, because we then think,
Mm.
oh, do we need to go in with the glyphosate?
Yeah.
Then we're going to be killing off all
Yes.
our biological action
Yes.
with glyphosate as well. So I think
What about undersowing then? If you're undersowing a whole crop or maize, I expect that has benefits as well, because
does,
you're only
definitely.
disturbing it, say, the once when you plant the maize, rather than disturbing it twice.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
So we did look at how the length of lay really impacted the amount of soil carbon, and it was really obvious that those that had just been reseeded were very much
Yeah.
lower carbon than those that
Well,
had
yeah,
been,
they're re-establishing roots or whatever it is to go
and
down.
that grassland that was perhaps in a arable rotation as well. So if they'd been, fodder beet or maize
Yeah.
or something beforehand, really impacted on that. And I think it was looking at sort of the 5-year lays were just about getting that soil carbon back to where you'd expect it
Yeah.
to be.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's really thinking about, actually, if it takes 5 years to get to there, we actually probably, best practice for reseeding is probably reseed every 5 years.
Well, that is about. That's
Well,
about right.
you talk about 20%. You should reseed 20% of your farm every year, so
Yeah.
that's going to be every 5 years.
Every 5 years. So actually we've only just got to that stage of building our soil carbon to then actually disturb it all again.
Yeah.
So I would question whether we should perhaps try and extend those lays.
Maize, yeah,
Is possibly a way of doing it.
yeah.
Can we use some more persistent grasses?
Mm.
The genetics
Yes.
out
I
there
was
is
just going to say,
Yeah.
it's
different
always
grasses.
changing.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The could be a new the new focus could be trying to make more
Yeah.
persistent.
Or
on that
minimal
side.
tool
Yeah.
if you need to. What's,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm.
I'm thinking there's probably going to be, sort of seen, rakes with seed boxes on the top. That
Yes.
could maybe become a way that we look to trying to re-establish grassland in that way. So we're really
Only
thinking
tickling
about
the top
tickling the top.
rather than turning the whole
Yeah.
lot.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
And I mean,
So-
before we even spoke about things like carbon capture, we used to think that a very good practice for your topsoil.
yes.
So you weren't losing your topsoil.
Yeah.
So it's never not been a good idea.
No.
Yeah.
And I think what's really interesting about soil carbon is that alongside soil organic matter, they actually play such an important role in your workability of your soils, your
Yep.
soil nutrients and everything else. So actually to have a good soil organic matter and a good soil carbon in your soils is going to be profitable for you and more sustainable for you anyway.
I mean, I know you looked at grassland, but it sort of fits with the whole minimal till for arable as well, doesn't it? Because
It
I
does.
mean, I know a farm that was doing it, and I know a farm where they were relying on the other farm to do a lot of the work, and they tried it, but then after a year or two, they only didn't like it because he felt it wasn't as clean and it didn't yield quite as well. But I suppose you say it's changing perceptions. That's the way we used to farm. It needed to be clean. It needed to be 100% weed free. It needed to be, everything looked perfect. Whereas actually, when you look at it, while you might not quite get the yield in the same way, the cost is lower because you're not turning it over. But also ecologically, is it better for your soil because you're not disturbing it in the same way?
Definitely, you're really looking after that soil biology, and that soil biology is then going to be working for you by releasing all the nutrients.
Yeah.
So actually, you were just saying there about the farmer that perhaps changed their mind after a couple of years.
Yeah.
It would have been really good to see him maybe go for 5 years
Yeah.
or that sort of length of time, so
Right.
that equilibrium can start
So kick
building
in.
up.
Yeah.
I think that when you perhaps change system like that, you will see those yield drops for those first few years,
Yes,
and it will
yeah.
take a little bit of time to get back
To
up
build
again.
up.
Yeah.
And I think it's trying to get over that
Yes, that
dip,
hump.
because
Yeah.
you know that's your profitability,
Yeah.
that's everything
Yeah.
that you're then starting to worry about. It's no good. I need to go back to fertilizers. I need to go back to this, and I need to go back to ploughing. And actually, if we can find a way that we can actually get over that hump, and I've been trying to think how this might work practically, and maybe it's just doing the odd field like that, so we're transitioning our farm
Yeah. Bit by
Mm.
bit.
bit by bit,
Yeah.
whether that's from a
Rotational
grassland
sort
point
of-
of view
Yeah,
or
yeah,
even
yeah.
on an arable system, that actually if
Well,
we
it is, let's be honest, it's not about necessarily forming organically or whatever. It's about being sustainable. And I know it's the buzzword, but it is. It's always about being sustainable. We've got to be here long term. We've got to feed the population. That's what it's about. We've got to achieve these things, but we've got to do it in a way that we can be doing it in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. So I'm going to be blunt. We ain't going to feed the world if we all go organic. Ain't going to happen. But so we've got to do it with the use of artificial
Yeah.
fertilisers and some chemicals, undoubtedly. But it's about using the right things at the right time to achieve the right results, and not just as, let's be honest, fathers or grandfathers' generation. Oh, it'd be right, just chuck it out there. I mean, antibiotics is another one. I mean, I still remember. My father's told me he remembers his father being told after the war, this will be, first antibiotics. This will cure mastitis. Mastitis will be, it will go,
disappear.
it'll disappear. And here we are now. Where are we now? 70, 80 years later, and it's still there and still happening. So it's just about targeting what we do right to make sure whether we don't get antibiotic resistance or we don't, whatever it happens to be. It's about being sustainable and making sure we're doing things for the long term.
I have a bit of a theory that we're working with biological systems. So when we're looking at agriculture, we're trying to convert solar energy
Yes.
into food energy.
Okay.
However,
Yeah.
we're going to do
Of course we
that.
are.
Yeah.
And therefore we're looking at natural biological processes.
Yeah.
And actually we need to be working with those natural
Sure.
biological processes.
Yeah.
And it's where we're inefficient in those is where we're actually getting our losses. So we might say we might want to put some fertilizer on, but actually when we start putting too much fertilizer on, we're then
Yes.
getting
Yeah.
an inefficiency. We're getting that biological system can't
We're getting
cope with that.
leaching or
We're
whatever
getting
happens to
leaching,
be. Yeah.
and it's where we've got an inefficiency. we're getting a pollutant of some
Yes.
kind, we're getting ammonia loss, we're getting some,
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
So it's actually really thinking about those biological systems, and it will
Comes
need
down
somebody.
to quantifying it to know what you can and can't do.
Yeah.
And it will be somebody far cleverer than me that works out the millions of different biological processes that works out how we get from sun energy into milk energy or the like, because of all of those. But all those very small processes that are going on in the soils to be releasing all of those nutrients and everything else. But actually, I think it's a way of really looking at our farming maybe a little bit differently. And
What you actually said is what recently I heard a guy speak about, is that sustainability and efficiency are actually the same word.
yes,
And we tend to, in
it's
the
a fair
world,
comment actually.
we end up with sustainability being like the
The
key
buzzword
word
at
and
the
the
moment.
buzzword.
Yeah.
But actually what you were saying, efficiency, you were saying inefficient.
Yeah.
Efficiency is the buzzword, because if you get your efficiency right,
Yes.
sustainability is no question.
exactly.
Let's start a new movement. Efficiency
Yeah.
is the buzzword.
Forget the sustainability, because we will be.
Yeah.
But you're right actually, because if you're not sustainable, or if you're not efficient, you're not going to be sustainable.
No.
And if you're not sustainable, you're not going to be efficient.
No.
And you're right, let's say you want, 100 units of N or whatever it is, and that's your level, then only spread 100, because that's where you're going to be. If you go to the 120, maybe she'll get a bit more. You're not getting that return on investment. You might get a little bit, but you're not going to get the return on investment on that, so don't do it. It's not worth it from an economical point of view as well as everything else.
Exactly, and that's where that sustainability fits in with the economical, the environment, and and the social. And it's actually, I think it really brings it all together.
It really does.
Yeah, it really does, definitely. I guess we've moved a bit off from soil carbon in that
Well,
discussion.
we do
but,
that.
It's all part of it, and let's be honest, we usually just roll with wherever it goes. So
We very seldom know what we're talking about.
no, exactly. We haven't got a clue.
I'm glad
really.
it's not just me. Though.
You're supposed to be the expert here, Sarah.
No, remember I said I wasn't an expert. But I only found this out so that I could then share
Yes,
it. And I
exactly.
think that's what I really like to do. It's
That's
to
lovely.
take what science is out there, what I can find from farmers, and actually try and put it together to really try and make something that's practical, that actually finds a solution and tries to bring it together. And that's certainly what I tried to do when I embarked on this soil carbon.
So you said you've got those different values for soil. We'll try and get back on subject now. Where was your next step from that then, or where does it go from there?
Oh, I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it, as to what can actually influence soil carbon.
Right.
There's so many factors that can influence it, whether it's our rainfall, whether it's our altitude, whether it's going back to our soil texture and what our bedrock is, how we're actually treating that soil. Sort of how whether we're tilling it, how we're cultivating it, how our animals use that.
Yeah.
That's.
Well, I guess that makes me think you say how animals use it. If they poach it, I'm assuming that does damage to it and affects the carbon content as well.
Exactly, because it's exactly the same. It's disturbing that soil, so it's exactly the same thing. Anything that disturbs the soil. But actually, it's really interesting. Going back to what I was saying, and actually ties back in with our sustainability, is that what's right for organic carbon is actually right for our soils as well. So if we start building our organic carbon, we're actually going to get better, what's the word I'm looking for, porosity. So water will actually infiltrate down through our soils better. We're going to get a better soil structure because we have got that increase in soil organic matter and soil carbon. So actually our land or our animal holding capacity of that land will increase, and in theory we should get less poaching because the water's infiltrated better and therefore we shouldn't get it. So it's almost if we think about these things, we will improve what we're doing.
But it's got to be making that almost leap of faith by the sounds of it first.
I think so. Which, sometimes perhaps we're humans, aren't we, and really don't like change. So.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But the movement only starts small and grows. And I mean, there are farmers that would 100% adapt to what you're saying if they're not already doing that. So
you say this, I was like, don't mention it. This has been coming for a long time, I'd suggest, whether we do or don't. I mean, when I was in North Queensland, so we're going back 25 years ago now, there was a story that the local MP, who was I thought he was private secretary to then Prime Minister John Howard, but I looked it up, he was something else, was buying up swathes of rainforests, and no one could understand why, because obviously I was in the tropics, there was rainforest up there, no one could understand why. And then I think they worked out it's because he was buying it potentially for carbon trading.
Yeah.
And at one point Australia did, I asked my father it yesterday and he said I thought farms were involved, he said they weren't. They did try carbon trading over there for one parliamentary term, and 3 years later that the Labour government got chucked out and the Nationals and Liberals came back in. The first thing they did was kick it straight out again, and this is going back probably 6-9 years ago maybe, I don't know, but I'd argue that people have known, those in the know have known that something along these lines has been coming for quite a while.
Certainly. I mean, you started our conversation talking about woodlands and everything,
Yes.
and hedgerows, that people are, those are sort of the topics that have been bandied around with.
But that's, I guess, what this is, the conversation part of this is about, is to the general public, their answer is, stick trees.
Yes.
But that doesn't feed people. And that isn't the answer to everything. So, I mean, from the work you've done, how do some of the best soils compare to putting it into woodland or whatever? Or does that depend on soil as well? Or
It all depends on the soils,
Yes.
the actual age of the woodland, and everything else. Because there, I believe, and as I say, it's not my
Yes.
soils really aren't my area of expertise.
Please.
I'm not really sure what is, but we can that actually. Trees will take carbon out of the soil as well. So
Yeah.
if we think about, it's what is a tree made of?
Carbon.
So
Yeah.
it will be taking
Carbon.
carbon out, but it will
Yes.
be storing it in that tree. But as soon as we
Yes.
cut down that tree,
Yeah.
the carbon's gone in that tree as well. So actually, it's only a way of storing carbon.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And it also depends on the type of tree. Because
Yes.
if nothing grows underneath that tree,
Yep.
well, then you've got bare ground all around it. So, but we actually had this is again, it's before carbon, before we were sort of thinking that way.
Yeah.
We had a lot of unstable dunes in South Africa. This is before all of our time. So they went to Australia and they brought Port Jacksons, which is a tree that grows like absolute weed. It just took over everything.
Yeah.
Didn't help anything. It didn't actually help a thing.
I mean, that does bring me on to another topic. Actually, I'm one of those that every day's a school day, and
Yeah.
like to try and be.
That's why we're here.
Yeah.
try and sort of look and see what might be the thing of the future, and we're talking about regen and
Yes.
sustainability.
Yeah. Mm.
And actually I'm in the middle of doing a course called holistic management, so it's actually sort of almost regen on steroids as
Yes.
to
a bit like I called biodynamic compared to organic is
Yes.
that on
Yeah.
steroids basically. Yeah.
So, and that's really understanding that actually if you let the natural grasses come in and everything else, so what you were saying there, that actually if they'd
Yeah.
let natural species take over,
Right.
you wouldn't have had that
No.
then huge overpopulation of something that shouldn't be
Well,
there.
let's be honest, it was repeat. I mean, Australia's put rabbits, cane toads,
So
it just
everything we do, what you're actually speaking about, that back to these Port Jacksons. These Port Jacksons is not particularly good. It's very light wood. It's not very good.
Yeah.
So when you get the normal fire that comes through every year, basically burns it. Now in the Western Cape, you've got a fynbos, or I'm not quite sure what the English word for that is, but it shoots seeds during the time, and
Yeah.
then the wildfires come over and they just clear out, because that's sort of part of the ecology.
Yeah.
And then these seeds are then not damaged, but basically just shoot,
Yeah.
and then they produce. Now the problem comes in, we put Port Jacksons in there, the heat from that fire is too high and
Too
kills the
intense.
seeds.
Yes.
So it's on the
Okay.
complete opposite. And I actually I was involved in a research project on pastures in South Africa in 1987 with the University of Natal. And so I learned a lot from these grassland people. But if you take a pioneer plant, now a pioneer plant like that might actually be a thistle.
Yeah.
And a thistle actually is a hardy,
Yes.
it's got pricks on that
Yeah,
stick you if you touch it, and nobody wants to eat it, and
Yeah.
it just stays there. And then in comes a little butterfly, poisons the plant, the seeds that have collected in it through the wind blowing from the grass, and then your annual plants come through and they become perennial plants. And that's actually how our whole ecology starts changing. So we sort of see a thistle and
Yeah.
or a
Well, actually, it brings me back. I remember going to a talk when I was in North Queensland, and they were talking about rainforests and that, and they say you've got to let like you're saying there, the pioneer plants, you've got to let a forest ebb and flow.
That's right.
Because if you say, right, that's my barrier and that's where it is, there's nothing coming past there, you're not getting any of those pioneer, those younger, newer species.
Yeah.
You're only getting older, mature, stale species, and you're actually affecting the ecology of it, because it should be ebbs in or it closes down, and it's all just part of it. But of course we go, right, that's the barrier, I'm not having any woodland grass across my fence line, and
dig
that's
it all up.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you talk about like those thistles coming in, but actually they're actually doing a really good job because they've got those lovely deep tap roots.
That's right.
They're actually probably breaking up
Opening up.
compaction and
Yeah,
opening up those soils and doing some good.
That's
So
exactly
it's then a case of actually how can we then, once they've done their job, then perhaps get rid of them. And I guess that's when we need to start using certainly in holistic management, they look at animal impact, and actually maybe it's a case of putting a big group of animals into a small space and actually eating up everything that's there, forcing them to effectively eat everything, so they will eat the thistles, or if they won't eat them, they'll trample them. So then actually that then gives an opportunity for those grasses to then take hold. So
we actually found that if you had to take 3 different levels of grazing, overgrazing, medium, and not too little undergrazing, that both sides of the coin were wrong. Because the one side of the coin with the undergrazed, so some of the more dominant species would actually dominate them and they destroy the other ones. Undergrazing, of course, or overgrazing, of course, just destroys everything. So the moderate actually becomes, and the whole point is, I mean, if you take stinging nettles on the ground, it's flat, the butterfly comes in and stings it and it dies, and as I say, all those seeds that have collected on it then start growing out of that pot, which protects the seeds. And that's, I learned this in 1988.
Yeah. I know. Well, we're going back to, but it's really interesting you talking about sort of overgrazing and undergrazing both being a problem. That's exactly the same thing when it comes to soil carbon, that if we undergraze it, we're not getting enough soil activity and everything else, but actually if we're overgrazing it, we're impacting it as well, because we're obviously getting our poaching and compacting the soil. So actually it's that happy medium, it's back to moderation. That's in fact the best thing for our soil carbons as well.
Yeah, it comes back to that. It does. It's like we're saying efficiency.
Definitely.
It's over efficiency or under efficiency.
So I guess in general though, the good soils, so I guess more the peaty soils, haven't been stirred for a long time, grassland, are up there comparing with trees quite happily.
Definitely. And sort of when you were talking about carbon markets as well, and actually it's really interesting that there are some carbon codes for trading carbon within peat and also carbon within trees, but as yet we haven't got a code for trading that soil carbon yet. It's on its way. I think that we will get to that, but I would certainly say seller beware. I mean, if I was a farmer, would I want to be selling my soil carbon?
Yeah.
In the fact of, if have I got to be net zero before I sell it? Is my, sort of, what if there's so many things that impact soil carbon that actually, am I in control of them all? No, I'm not in control of the rainfall. I'm not in control of a lot of things. And
or the rainfall, it could be dry or wet.
Exactly. And, if I've sold it, and what if my soil carbon reduces in that time? Have I then got to pay that difference?
Because it's interesting, so I just meant to say this and I forgot, I was invited on, where are we now? What day was it? Wednesday, so 2 days ago, onto a meeting with Arla. Someone I deal with invited me to take part in this meeting. It was Arla, a couple of ladies from Arla talking about their the Arla sustainability that's just come out, and you could tell did they say something like 60 meetings to farmers, because it just flowed and they knew what they were talking about. But that was something that came in. They said on their carbon, hold on, I've got to look at it, so sequestration will be coming into their model in, I think they said 2024, I think it was, or maybe it's 25, next year or two. But the comment they said was, it will probably not have as big an effect as you're expecting in terms of knocking your carbon output down. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, and I must remember that for today. But as you say, buyer beware. Where who knows where it's going to
I
go.
think we certainly need to wait for those codes of conduct to come in. But equally, I think I would just be worried that I'm not, if it was me in that situation, that I'm not in full control of what's happening in those soils. Whilst I can do a lot, I can't do everything.
Basically, what you're suggesting is you want to make sure you've got a massive is that the right word? Net or minus then on your carbon, so you've got a little bit of buffer there to potentially.
It's difficult, isn't it? So it goes back again to, actually, I would be saying to perhaps Arla as to they need to look at that soil carbon to soil clay ratio, because actually they can't be telling one farmer that they're doing really well if they've got a high clay content and a high soil carbon. They actually need to. And I really think that we need to be sharing this message that just because somebody's got a sandy soil, they will never get to that
no,
same
they're never
content.
going to, are they?
And I'm really that's one of my things that I'm really adamant we need to be measuring like for like. That farm, just because you're very lucky that you've got a soil that actually can hold that soil carbon, you shouldn't get. You shouldn't get credited for that when actually
it should be,
or you shouldn't certainly be penalised if you can't hold that soil carbon.
It should be measured relative to the soil you have.
Definitely.
So if you've got sandy soil and are achieving good results, you get as many points as that. But if you're a clay achieving poor results, you get less than the person with the
That's
sandy.
where that baseline comes from. That you spoke about. You need a baseline.
You know, I would be really passionate that really needs to be taken into consideration, and I really hope that they do. And I think, you know, whenever we talk about soil carbon, I think that we need to be considering that. So.
That's vital.
But where do you think this fits into the bigger picture, I suppose? Because let's be honest, we're all being talked about carbon for airplanes and cows and everything else, and I know I've quoted it before in a previous podcast. I remember, what it said, your carbon footprint, if you eat a 4-ounce piece of steak every other day, your carbon footprint is still going to be less than someone that takes a plane flight visit to the US or something like that. So again, I'm like, well, it's the wrong industries being hit here. I'm sorry, but why? We're the easy target, aren't we? It should be the 80-20 rule, and yet we seem to be going for the 20% all the time.
Yeah, we're humans, aren't we? We like to hit somebody that perhaps doesn't know the information to be able to hit back. And I think it's really vital that we understand actually the difference between maybe grass-fed beef versus American feedlot beef, which the carbon impact will be hugely different. And that's where we really need to be promoting our own beef industry as to, you know, a lot of our beef industry is grass-fed at certain stages, and you know,
I guess you could say those people that say we need to go to a meat-free diet, I'm sorry, well, I'm going to disagree because I like my meat. But also disagree because, like we're talking about grass-fed beef, this ground cannot be. I remember having this conversation with someone on, was it Facebook or something? Oh, can't we at least put a little bit of whatever it is in? And it's like, no, because you don't understand. These mountains in Wales or Dartmoor or wherever they are cannot be ploughed up or minimal tilled, whatever, cannot be used to grow crop. They are not suitable for cropping. They are grass based, and if we want to make the most of that, like you're talking about, sun energy into feed energy, they need livestock as they're the perfect machines, let's call them that, in this instance, for turning grass into an energy, whether it's milk or meat, to be used for our consumption. So they are still part of the solution.
They are part of the solution, definitely. Somebody once told me that if you take a sheet of A4 paper and imagine that's the surface of the globe, and half our globe is land and the other half is water. So we start folding our piece of A4 in half, and then we fold it again as to how much land can we actually get to as humans, and there isn't mountains and whatever else. And actually we get to that stage that the only the land that we can actually farm for crops is the size of a business card, which is having folded that piece of A4 paper 3 or 4 times. And if we think of that, the size of a business card versus the size of an A4 bit of paper, but actually if we open that back up to 2 bits of two business card size, that's our grassland, and that's the doubling our area that we can actually grow food for our
and if we want
population.
to feed people, that's got to be part of the solution. And let's be honest, that's ultimately what it comes down to, because what was it the other day I saw, they said, oh, for the airlines to go net zero or something, or to go away from fossil fuels, you would have to turn half of UK farmland into growing, I guess, biodiesel or whatever it happens to be. It's just not going to happen, because it's going to come down to you've got to feed the people.
Yeah. So going back to aeroplanes, it was really interesting. I went on a long haul flight just before COVID on a nice holiday, and it told me how much carbon was on in my flight, and I worked that out. That I needed to plant one oak tree, and it needed to survive for 70 years to cover that one flight. So I now have one oak tree in my garden. I'm just worried as to where I'm going to plant my next oak tree to cover my next long haul flight to sunnier climes.
We have a forest soon.
But I might start needing to actually purchase a bigger piece of land to actually start. But that interested me myself that I worked it out, that I had to plant that tree has got to survive 70 years. Well, I'm not going to survive 70 years, so I'd have no children to pass that tree on to. So who knows?
But what you were saying about that, I mean, we speak about soil, right, and we were talking about the capture, but and different soil types and how we should actually be specifying between different farms and different soil. And what you were saying about beef production or dairy production or whatever, exactly the same scenario, because you could actually be eating your piece of meat with a low carbon footprint, as compared to somebody that's eating a piece of meat that's got a high carbon footprint.
Exactly.
And maybe that is something, if you really want to push it, put it on the label like your aeroplane.
From what you were just saying, actually, as well, thinking about it, I'm sorry, I'm going to have a go at vegetarians here. I've got friends that are vegetarians, that's fine. I suppose it's the more extreme ones. If you've got to plough or whatever that soil to be able to grow whatever the crop is you need to grow, that is, even if you're not eating meat, surely that's probably going to have a higher carbon footprint than that permanent pasture, where it be side of Snowdonia or whatever, where those sheep have been grazing to turn it into meat. So actually you've got less carbon out of that eating meat than what you do.
Definitely. Especially if we're flying it over, if we're drinking almond, I'm going to put milk in inverted commas, that the carbon footprint of something like that compared to a grass-fed cow in the UK is amazing. But I'm just saying that I wasn't any good at figures, and I've just had to turn to the right page in my book, that I believe that UK soils can store around 10 billion tonnes of carbon. And that's actually equivalent to 57 times the UK's greenhouse gas emissions in 2017.
And we've got about 60% of free, would that be about right? Free ground that hasn't got a house built on it. Or
it's about that we've probably
60%.
got. Yeah.
So I mean, that to put that in context, that's we should actually be building less houses and
well, we know
planting more crops.
We know that. I suppose you could also say your lawns are ultimately in its own little way important.
It is.
People shouldn't be putting in plastic, artificial grass and whatever.
From a biodiversity point of view, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And can we stop the general public doing that? Probably not, because they like a nice looking lawn in their back garden that's not really a lawn, and it's thinking that actually I think it's something like 40% of the UK is actually permanent pasture. So if you're thinking that actually that is quite a nice big sink for all of that, all of that carbon. So we've got a chance in doing this.
So we don't need to turn it all back into trees.
We definitely don't. Let's keep growing our beef and our milk and lamb and pork, etc. All from our grasslands.
And every time you go long haul, plant an oak tree, which I really like the idea.
I'm not planning to do any more, but I suppose we've got a few to make up for over the years. So
It's the thing. I suppose everybody varies, but I mean, I've been flying in aeroplanes since I was 4 years old. So
Just for me, it's,
I'm going to have to plant a lot of oak trees.
yeah. So for me, it's just a few times back and forwards to Oz, but yeah.
Exactly. We should have forests.
We should do. We should all go out and plant them.
Yeah.
But
I'm
it's
not sure
just-
how well it go down if I go, hi hun, I'm going to plant a few oak trees in the garden. It's
Yeah.
not very big, but yeah, we might squeeze a couple in there.
7 or 8.
Mine's not even 4 foot high yet, but
Yeah.
I have aspirations for it.
But I mean, there's other ways of doing it. We've got pot plants with trees and
Yes.
pear
Yes.
trees and apple trees, and
Exactly.
so it's not.
It's all different ways.
Definitely.
It's all different ways.
I'm not saying there's not much soil, but the tree itself.
So, is there anything else we should know about this, Sarah, before we move on to our other little topic we were going to ask you about?
Oh gosh, there's probably so much that I can probably say. I think it's thinking about perhaps going back to our discussion about sustainability, and actually those soils that we put organic manures on rather than artificial fertilizers, we were getting those higher carbon contents, but you would expect that because you're actually adding carbon.
Yes,
So
in manure,
it's
yeah,
not what
yeah.
it's exactly what you would expect.
Yeah,
So but I think it's just what I really liked was that my conclusion was that if we managed our grassland for productive grassland, we were probably doing something really good for our soil carbon anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if we weren't poaching it, we
Yes,
weren't.
yes.
And as I say, the only caveat I put on that is the reseeding, and it's
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the one that I just think that we need to just work out what we're going to do.
In a lot
On
of
that
ways,
side of it.
I suppose it's the answer, ain't it? But in a lot of ways, we could almost do it going back to a traditional mixed farm.
Exactly. Jeremy Clarkson's got it right.
Yeah.
Bringing his beef back and whatever.
It is,
his
it is,
arable
it's-
lands, his chickens. And
Exactly, it is. It's the traditional mixed farm that was doing this, and let's be honest, I'm not trying to have a go at any particular aspect of the farming industry because we're all important and we all have our role to play. But some of those purely arable, probably more on the east now, are starting to lack some of that because they've not got the natural manures going back on them and
Definitely.
stuff.
Definitely. So it's finding a way that, whether that's actually changing the farming systems or finding a way to actually move that manure from the west to the east in an
yes.
economic, low carbon way.
Yes.
Who knows?
Yes.
But there's,
Yes.
that's where perhaps there's room for more scientific innovation and
Well,
everything else.
nitrogen
isn't there?
saccharide comes to
Well, I
mind.
was just about to say, it reminds me of that one, wasn't it? Because when we talked about the gazoo, there was the guy in
It was
Holland
forward.
was like, oh, I can pay for this in 5 years. Well, that was because he was paying €30,000 a year to haul his slurry manure away because his phosphate levels were too high. It almost, there's almost a degree of that as you say, there are. I know of farms around here. Their P's and K's are 4s and 5s, much too high. Those immediately around the dairy, but because you're getting the travels over them quite a lot. But you're saying, it's almost like that needs to be exported and find a way to export that onto those soils.
That's why I said that nitrogen cracker was possibly one of the best things I've ever seen in my career. From a solution point of view, whether we've still got to sort that out. Yeah, I think so. Forward is connected to them.
Oh right, so I spent a while with Forward managing
Yes.
a team of 7 engineers.
Yeah. Well, as I suspect Forward were taken over by Joz last year.
In Holland.
Yes.
And obviously Joz have now got this Gazoo, which is a nitrogen cracker, and so we spoke to
It's actually one of our podcasts.
one of our
I
podcasts.
need to listen.
You do.
You'll love it. It's really
I
good.
will do.
And obviously there are others on the market as well. I know Lane
Yeah.
have got their Sphere, and I think there's someone from Edinburgh, N2 Applied have gone in with GA. I don't know the technology really for
I
those
saw
two.
one advertised from China on Facebook.
Yeah, so I don't know the technology, but certainly with the Gazoo, I mean, it takes your slurry and it turns it into a drier manure for you, so you're not so it's easier to haul.
Yeah.
And then obviously
liquid nitrogen.
and a liquid sprayable fertilizer. So
You take that to the east if you want to.
Precisely.
Yeah,
Precisely.
I was going to say, but you could quite easily export one or the other, and it would work quite well.
But also reducing your own costs in taking water out to
Yes.
a field the far side of the farm. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
all got positives, hasn't
And
it?
having that smell going right through the village with
Well, that was our comment, wasn't it? At the time, was I think at the moment it would be, why are you doing this? Geez, that costs a lot of money. Because let's be blunt, I think it's about 350k, I think, to get one set up.
Yeah.
I mean, our comment was, I think in 10 years' time, it will be a case of, well, why aren't you doing this? Because the environmental, and I think there was the farm that we looked at, the agronomist had looked at it, and he thought, if he'd done his sums right, he said, I think that could potentially save us a load of fertiliser buying in every year. It's about being more effective with what we were doing and what we're saying. Definitely. And this technology will get cheaper, and it will be, I think you'll see them everywhere in time. I really do.
And funny, each of our talks that we do, it almost always comes up, because it's just got such a broad, I mean, your topic, previous topic, it all comes into the...
It all links together. It all links together. Yeah. But I mean, so, as you say, it's such a broad subject. We've tried to give a taster, which is effectively what we're doing with all of the subjects we do, because we try not to go too technical or whatever it is. But obviously, if people want to follow up, then please let us know and we can consider it. But is there no other, on the subject of carbon, is there anything else you think we should know really at this stage, other than we've just given a hint to everybody of what's out there?
I think that we've probably given a good hint to everybody that's out there, but I think it's really, stay being an efficient grassland farmer, and I think you'll probably look after your soil carbon, and I think that's probably the way forward.
Okay. Good, that's grand. Because the other thing we thought we'd ask you briefly about, I knew you were involved, but I hadn't realised you're obviously one of the co-founders of Women in Dairying, aren't you?
I am. So this came about when I was working with AHDB. A colleague and I were sitting there sort of discussing, well, we don't get many women across to our meetings, and we've tried putting some topics to our discussion groups as to, I don't know, succession planning, or really drilling down into the finances, and just certain topics that we were putting in front of them, and they weren't really grasping that idea, and we suddenly worked out we were actually talking to the wrong person within the business.
Yes.
So we had, at that point in time, we were running, I don't know, herdsmen's groups, apprentice groups, general farm groups of cow, all sorts of different meeting groups, but had neglected one major part of farming businesses. So we got together and we said, right, let's put on a meeting just for women. My colleague was working in Cornwall at the time and I was working in Devon, so lovely big dairy area, and we chose a spot right on the border, sent out 300 invitations, and basically it was said on the outside of the envelope, for the attention of the ladies involved in the business.
Yep.
And it went out. We had over 100 people to that first meeting.
Wow.
We stood in the kitchen of this village hall going, oh gosh, what have we done? The noise out there is 100 women in a room. For some reason, it's a lot noisier than 100 men in a room. But what was really interesting is that we had a huge range of women that came along that had been ballet dancers, had their own careers, but were then back doing...
Married a farmer
and worked on farms now, or all sorts. And we had anything from a 16-year-old through to a 73-year-old that was still running her farm in her own right. And it was absolutely amazing. And at the same time, we realised that RABDF, in conjunction with Promar, had got some European funding and had set up a similar meeting in Cheshire. Yeah. So we thought, what have we got to lose? So we met up with these two lovely ladies. So Becky Miles and myself from down in the west, and then Lisa Williams from Promar at the time, and Emily from RABDF, and we sat around the table. We immediately got on, and basically from that moment, Women in Dairy was born. So that was probably 10 years ago now. So we're just coming up this year planning our 9th annual conference. So
brilliant.
It's just gone from strength to strength. We've got, I think it's 12 discussion groups around the country, and we run sort of a couple of sort of regional meetings as well during the year. In conjunction with our sponsors, Bowringer, they sponsor, help sponsor those regional meetings and our discussion groups. And it's just, and we have our annual Women in Dairy Award as well, which look out for applications for that. That's going to open soon. So it'd be great to have there's some amazing women out there that we really want to hear about. So
well, I mean, I know her because I've worked with her over the years. I mean, this year's Farmers Weekly Dairy Farm of the Year was a local farmer who happens to be a woman, and she's a great farmer.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of great women farmers in the area. I mean, in my previous position, I was lucky enough to work with a lot of great women farmers out there. There really are, and these were really good farmers. Definitely.
So it's really nice to be a part of that organisation, and it's something that I'm hugely proud of. I'd say that's probably one of my proudest achievements, really, is getting to meet some great people in the industry.
Let's be honest, you go back a generation, and it was the farmer's wife, and that was it. It was now you can't make that assumption at all. No. There are so many good women farmers out there.
Well, I was one of 2 females doing the agriculture course that I did at university, and I think these days you look at the statistics and you know it's usually 50-50 now, so it's very much changed.
Yeah, we had 4 ladies out of a class of about 64. Yeah.
And you know it's lovely to hear that that's now 50-50, or even in some places more females than there are male, and I think it's we're an important part of the industry.
Well, I mean,
hugely.
It is. I mean, you look at vets now. The large majority of large animal vets now are women, and I certainly remember the first woman vet coming to the practice we used when I was a child, and the hoo-ha that there was going to be, and she'll pinch somebody's husband, and she did end up marrying a local farmer, but just the hoo-ha, she won't be strong enough, she won't be this, she won't be that.
Things have changed.
I know.
Definitely.
Perception certainly has.
Oh, definitely.
And it's all for the best.
Oh, for sure. Oh, of course. Yeah, it really is.
But no. But that's grand. Thank you for just giving us a brief little bit on the women in dairying, because you say I knew you were involved, but I hadn't realised you were a co-founder till I saw it.
Our mother-in-law was a great farmer. So
there you go. It's in the family.
But no. So on that, I guess any last words of wisdom on whatever you feel like saying, Sarah?
Oh, you've now put me on the spot. So no, I've now gone like a rabbit in headlights. So we'll leave it at that.
Oh dear. Anything else?
Yeah, well, thanks, Sarah. That was great. Yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed this as usual. But that was fantastic.
It does. I mean, this is a subject that for both of us was foreign, I suppose, is the best way to put it. I mean, usually one or other of us knows something about a subject, whereas for both of us it's been quite a very much an eye-opener. So that's been really good. So on that one, I'd like to say thank you, Sarah. It's been our pleasure. So I hope you've enjoyed yourself.
I've thoroughly enjoyed myself.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. So thank you. So as usual, if anybody would like to contact us, the email is podcast@ChewintheCud.com, or Twitter is @ChewintheCudPod. We're on other social media as well. Any questions for Sarah, or say any of our other guests, please feel welcome to send them to us, and we will quite happily pass them on. Otherwise, yes, thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch up with you next time.
Yeah. Cheers. Have a good one.
Yeah, thank you and goodbye. And now for the really boring bit, I'm afraid, the legal disclaimer. The information provided during this podcast has been prepared for general information purposes only and does not constitute advice. The information must not be relied upon for any purpose, and no representation or warranty is given to its accuracy, completeness, or otherwise. Any reference to other organisations, businesses, or products during this podcast are not endorsements or recommendations of Chewing the Cud Ltd. The views of Andrew Jones are personal and may not be the views of Chewing the Cud Ltd, and the views of Neil Greggor are personal and may not be the views of Master Gen Ltd and any affiliated companies. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.